Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Wow, this episode got out of control, like really, really out of control. Settle in for the long haul, gang. Also, apologies for all the Trump news. I really hope we will soon no longer have to report on his nonsense. Now let's get going, because we gotta get this out before the vice presidential debate starts. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. You make this possible. First off, a major warning to anyone living near the Gulf. Hurricane Delta has upgraded itself from a Category 1 to Category 4 in record time. I believe it's since dropped back down to Cat 3, but still dangerous. It's currently aimed at Louisiana, but could easily change course to Texas or even Florida. Keep your eyes peeled and be ready to evacuate quickly if necessary. Alright, let's get the Trump stuff out of the way. I don't recall if I mentioned that the White House and Pelosi had re-entered talks for a stimulus deal recently. Frankly, I expected nothing to come of it, since the main roadblock is the Senate, not Trump, and McConnell has been explicitly clear that he does not intend to agree to anything remotely close to real relief for the economy. Nevertheless, negotiations went on until yesterday. Trump said he is ending negotiations on a new coronavirus economic relief bill and will not revisit a new stimulus package until after the election, deciding to use desperately needed economic relief for the country as an extortionate bribe for votes, just as he did by promising to make payroll tax cuts permanent if he wins. Of course, neither of those actions can actually be taken by him alone, so they are false promises in addition to extortion. This also comes right after the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell, gave his most dire warnings yet that stimulus is needed and we should err on the side of too much, calling the consequence to the economy tragic if too little relief is passed. Trump's justification was that he refuses to give money to state and local governments, whose budgets have been gutted by both increased costs from dealing with COVID and decreased revenue from the economic crisis. That, and he said he wants to focus on the Supreme Court nomination, which he intends to use in his overthrow of democracy when he contests the election results. Almost immediately, Trump partially went back on his word, shocking I know, offering Pelosi a standalone bailout for the airlines and some money for the Paycheck Protection Program, which went so well the first time. Essentially, Trump has refused any help for the people and is now only willing to provide corporate socialist bailouts. Pretty typical. And why did he change his mind? Because the stock market crashed after his earlier pronouncement. Trump has been very clear throughout his presidency that stocks are what he cares about, even reiterating that in his tweet thread when he announced his end to negotiations. The lack of relief means real hardship and even death for many Americans who can no longer afford the basic necessities as a result of the pandemic that Trump himself has kept alive in America. How does one even express the appropriate level of disgust at this point? All Yang himself could muster was to say, effing terrible. The Trump administration has, at this point unsurprisingly, refused to conduct contact tracing on the people infected at Barrett's superspreader event. These people are from all over the country, travel often, and will spread the virus everywhere. Health professionals are outraged that the CDC guidelines of calling and interviewing everyone who could have been exposed and getting them tested is not being done. But it's just one more day in the life of the death cult that the Republican Party has become under Trump. Since Trump has also returned to his propaganda about the flu being worse than COVID, let's take a moment to debunk this BS. COVID is many times worse than the flu. Over the last 10 years, an average of 36,000 Americans have died annually from the flu. COVID has killed 210,000 Americans so far this year, making COVID about 6 times more deadly than the flu, and it will be more so by the end of the year. Alligator eats the bigger number, Trump. Once we have a vaccine for COVID, the danger will reduce and could potentially be on par with the flu. We don't know yet. It will depend on how effective the vaccine is, how fast COVID mutates, how long immunity lasts, etc. But right now, there is no contest whatsoever. Even Trump knew that COVID was more deadly than the flu all the way back in February, as he admitted on tape in his interview with Woodward. He just chose to lie to the country and continues to do so, even knowing he's killed tens of thousands of Americans and continues to suppress the economy. As for the inevitable objections of COVID reporting being unreliable, sourced from whatever the newest propaganda misconception is, as we discussed before, excess mortality rates, which measure the deaths above the normal rate, put the lie to all of that. There have been 207,000 more deaths this year than normal. A death is a death. There is no ambiguity in that reporting. It doesn't matter how it was classified or if it's confused with other diseases or any of that nonsense. There have been 207,000 more deaths this year than last year's death rate would predict, and it's due to COVID, plain and simple. And also remember, death is not the only threat from COVID. The disease is not well understood, but we do know it causes damage all over the body and can cause permanent damage to organs, including the heart, lungs, and brain, causing impairment or even premature death down the road. COVID can activate dormant conditions like asthma, can raise the risks for things like Alzheimer's, and may have any host of long-term effects we are not yet aware of. For all we know, it could lower life expectancy of all survivors, or cause slow muscle deterioration that eventually leaves you paralyzed, or brain deterioration that leaves you a vegetable after 10 years. We don't know. Don't mess with it. And for the love of God, don't believe anything Trump tells you about it. One thing Trump hasn't done since getting the virus: express any sympathy or empathy for the hundreds of thousands of families who have lost loved ones to it. Following his tweet about the flu, which was flagged as disinformation by Twitter and even Facebook, Trump repeated his temper tantrum of calling for a repeal of Section 230. Childish as he is, it's important to note that not only would repealing the law guarantee that Trump is fully kicked off of social media, it would mean suppression of free speech for everyone. Section 230 is a law that protects social media from being liable for everything said on the platform. Repealing that would mean these companies would massively ramp up their censorship in order to avoid lawsuits, as he has demonstrated clearly, both in calling any media that is critical of him fake news and in stating that reporters should be jailed or executed. Trump is not pro-free speech or anti-censorship. He likes censorship, but he wants to be in control of who gets censored. Repealing Section 230 could be the first step to that, followed by the implementation of a new law that gives the executive branch control of censorship on social media, which Trump would happily abuse to silence his critics. But for now, 230 is still in place, and Facebook has actually started following through on its standards regarding at least one misinformation group, QAnon. Facebook announced Tuesday that it will begin purging all Facebook pages, groups, and Instagram accounts representing the conspiracy theory group. QAnon grew out of the 2016 Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which claimed Democrats were running a child trafficking ring in the basement of a pizza parlor, which doesn't have a basement. Followers believe a cabal of Satan-worshipping, child trafficking elites rule the world, and they have been gaining disturbing support on the right, even successfully running for office in the Republican Party. It probably goes without saying that they and Trump have a mutual and well-documented affection for one another. However, that announcement by Facebook was likely released to cover up another from House lawmakers who spent the last 16 months investigating the practices of big tech companies. The committee determined that Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google have exercised and abused monopolistic power and called for the most sweeping changes of antitrust laws in half a century. They find that the companies have been setting and often dictating prices and rules for commerce, search, advertising, social networking, and publishing. The lawmakers recommend breaking up the companies, emboldening the agencies that police market concentration, reforming antitrust laws, and throwing up hurdles for the companies to acquire startups in order to restore competition, improve innovation, and safeguard democracy. This is a bold breakout defense of free markets in a government largely run by lobbyists of these very same companies. For reference, some of the monopolistic practices being discouraged are the buying up of competitors to prevent competition and innovation, biased marketplaces, such as Amazon and Google favoring their own products and services in search results or fees, Apple charging exorbitant prices for access to its App Store, and so on. The purpose of antitrust laws are to prevent companies from dominating their industry to the point that they suppress competitive pricing and innovation, founding principles of capitalism. The larger the company, the more power they can exert over government as well, which can reach the point of no return where they are essentially making the very laws which govern them. This is when free market dies and capitalism becomes kleptocracy. Most would argue we are on the border of this right now. Some Republicans agreed with proposals to bolster funding for antitrust enforcement agencies, but balked at calls to restructure the companies and their business models. Others have refused to endorse any of the findings of the largely Democrat committee. The top Republican on the committee called the report partisan because the committee had not tackled Republicans' subjective allegations that the online platforms are biased against their views, saying that ignoring the topic ultimately discredits the draft report's findings. How these Republicans expect government to regulate whether a company is biased against partisan ideology, or how that negates the need to break up monopolies, I could not tell you. If you've used Google+, Yang and DDP have found yet another lawsuit where you may be owed money for data leaks. The deadline to apply is tomorrow, October 8th. Go to ddpforall.com's class action claims tool for more details on how to submit a claim, link below. Humanity Forward candidate Adam Christensen put out a really solid new ad yesterday. He leans into his job preventing fraud and presents himself as a politician for the people, not corporations. My favorite line was, quote, "The best products don't win anymore, the cheap knockoffs do, and it's the same way in Congress," end quote. Nailed it. A new candidate has also emerged for the House in Missouri's 4th District, Lindsey Simmons. She just dropped a moving ad that explains her reasons for running, including a tragically forgotten issue, Trump's betrayal of our allies in Syria. I know, it's a lot of Trump today, but I often hear his supporters refer to his foreign policy acumen, so let's review what happened here. Trump's version of the story is that he pulled our troops out of Syria because he's anti-war. As always with Trump, that's not exactly the case. What happened was that Turkey wanted to invade, and Trump ordered our troops to let them. In the process, Trump abandoned our allies, the Kurds, who had been doing most of the work fighting ISIS for us. Many Kurds were slaughtered and driven from their homes after Trump pulled their support out from under them. ISIS prisoners also escaped prison. The conflict was between the Turkish military and Syrian National Army against the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Syrian Arab Army. It resulted in the displacement of over 300,000 people and killed more than 70 civilians in Syria and 20 in Turkey. Human rights violations have also been reported. Amnesty International stated that it gathered evidence of war crimes by Turkish-backed forces who are said to have displayed a shameful disregard of civilian life, including summary killings and unlawful attacks on civilians. Trump's sudden pullout was widely warned against by his military advisors as a serious betrayal to the Kurds and a catastrophic blow to U.S. credibility on the world stage. One journalist wrote, "This is one of the worst U.S. foreign policy disasters since the Iraq War." The U.S. Defense Department Inspector General released a report finding that the American withdrawal and subsequent Turkish incursion allowed ISIL to reconstitute capabilities and resources within Syria and strengthen its ability to plan attacks abroad. So, is it wrong to withdraw from the Middle East? That's controversial. Is it wrong to do so recklessly? Yes. What was the outcome of Trump's actions? Turkey occupies part of Syria, war crimes were committed, thousands were killed or displaced, the Kurds, following our betrayal, allied with terrorist dictator Bashar Assad, ISIS terrorists have regained strength, and our troops are still there. Wait, what was that last one you ask? Oh, right. You see, most of our troops didn't actually leave Syria, they just changed location within it, after Trump ordered them to guard oil reserves instead. So, what was the point of all that destruction of lives and alliances? You got me. Ask Trump. Alright, so this is really important. I just watched Lessig's TED Talk on campaign finance reform, explaining how it's a money primary that picks the political candidates we get to choose from, all but eliminating our meaningful participation in the process, and making this the most fundamental problem to solve before we can get government to solve any other problems. This includes UBI and everything else we want, unless we can convince the moneyed special interests to back it. This is why I say that Biden and the Democratic Party's support of public campaign finance is reason enough to support him and them in the elections. They are willing to make the one move that will enable everything else. I absolutely recommend watching Lessig's video clip below. Seriously, it's the most important issue there is, and this video will help you understand it better and better explain it to others. If you have to choose between listening to the rest of this podcast or that video, watch the video. UBI proposals are springing up in Kuwait now. Investment consultant Al Salim is suggesting perhaps the most radical step yet in replacing all government subsidies with a $50,000 annual UBI for all citizens of working age. He argues this would solve for income inequality while avoiding the creation of bureaucratic makework and leave people free to participate in the private sector however they choose. Yeah, sign me up. Also, big news from across the pond, Derry and Strabane just became the 8th council in the UK to pass a motion calling for a UBI pilot. It is incredible how fast UBI Lab works over there. Important message to share from Cesar Marquez today, quote, "In the 30 to 40 minutes I phone banked for David Kim, I was able to get 5 supporters. Everyone in my group had a similar experience. Now think about the multiplier effect if the Yang Gang got off Twitter for a little bit and helped Humanity Forward and local candidates." End quote. David Kim adds, quote, "If all of you gave 1 hour each for making calls, we would secure the win. It's that simple." End quote. And they are correct. All it takes is each person contributing a small amount of time to make our dreams come true. 1 hour on the phones, that is achievable for anyone. Think about everything that you want our government to achieve. Are our goals of UBI, universal healthcare, democracy reform, and more not worth 1 hour on the phone? Only you can answer that call. Here's something you didn't expect to hear. California's Prop 24 data rights bill now has its own rap song. Yep. Humanity Forward and California Yang Gang came together to provide the world exactly what it most needs during these dire times. It's not bad. Check the links to listen for yourself. Finally, for any meme lords out there, More Equitable Democracy is holding a meme contest for ranked choice voting. Submit your best memes in support of RCV, and the top 10 chosen will receive a $100 reward. Pretty sweet deal. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Keep your eyes on Hurricane Delta. Bookmark and share the stimulus, COVID versus flu, Section 230, Syria, and antitrust threads. Check your eligibility for the Google lawsuit. Check out Adam and Lindsay's ads, the Prop 24 rap, and definitely Lessig's TED Talk. Get in on the meme contest. Phone bank for an hour to make America what it should be. Help recruit other organizations to the cause and get everyone to sign the UBI petition. Flood Congress and Trump with calls, tweets, and letters using the Resist Bot or Income Movement easy contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, United Way, or the H3 podcast thread. And don't forget to Yang Daily.